Hello, and welcome to the Dance Physio Podcast, a podcast designed to explore ideas and foster discussion around dancer health and wellness. We're here to challenge the status quo, bridge the gap between dance science and the studio, and help change the landscape of the dance industry for the better. I'm your host, Erica Mayall, a dancer turned physiotherapist who is deeply passionate about leaving the dance world better than I found it. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dance Physio Podcast. I am your host, Erica Mayall, and I am excited to have a guest with me today. And I'm really excited for you guys to get to know Sarah a little bit better and to hear a little bit about her story. So Sarah is a PhD and associate professor in the Faculties of Kinesiology and Arts at the University of Calgary in Canada, where she leads a combined Bachelor of Kinesiology and Bachelor of Arts in Dance undergraduate degree program. As a dance science researcher, Dr. Kenny investigates areas described as health for dance and dance for health. Specifically, Dr. Kenny's research applies her experience as a contemporary dance artist to the science of injury epidemiology and focuses on reducing the burden of injuries across all dance populations. In addition, she explores the psychosocial experience of community dance as a form of creative physical activity across the age spectrum. Currently, Dr. Kenny serves as the president for Healthy Dancer Canada, which you've heard me talk about lots on the podcast before, the Dance Health Alliance of Canada, and as an associate editor for the Journal of Dance Medicine and Science. She's also a registered provider of the Safe and Dance International certificates. So welcome to the podcast, Sarah. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Erica.
All right. So anytime I have a guest on, I like to start way back at the beginning with how did little Sarah first get involved in dance? Or do you have any early memories of first falling in love with dance?
Well, I grew up in a small town in rural Alberta. So my early memories of dancing are with my friends, who were all 4 years old, in a community hall wearing our little ballet leotards with the dance teacher who was living in our town at the time. And from there kind of grew into local neighborhoods who had dance classes or studios. But often my early dancing was in a school gymnasium or in the hall of a community center.
That's amazing. And not necessarily the same typical story you hear of kids being in really structured, very, a competitive or a very structured program right from the very beginning. So was there a transition when you got to a certain age or a certain level where you were okay, I want, something a bit more structured or a little bit more robust, or where did you go from there?
Yeah, from there, sort of the regular weekly classes, maybe once or twice a week with my friends, with the dance instructor who was living in our town at the time. I remember expressing interest in a summer camp, and we live about an hour and a half drive northwest of Calgary in Alberta. And I'm sort of thinking that my mom would have done some research to see what summer camps are available, because I ended up registering for one at Decidedly Jazz Dance Works in Calgary. And I would have been in junior high. I'm not sure if it was the summer of grade 7 or the summer of grade 8, but that was a life-changing experience for me to be able to attend a summer camp, sort of intensive, Monday to Friday, dancing most of the day in a space and in a genre that was really fun and playful and creative. And that really, I think, planted the seed for me to know that whatever I did into adulthood, dancing was going to be a part of it.
That's amazing. And so then you went on, correct me if I'm wrong, but you went on, you went to the University of Calgary?
I did, yes.
That's what I thought. So then how did that transition happen?
Yeah, so sort of grade 11, grade 12 in high school, there's these courses called Career and Life Management in the Alberta provincial curriculum. And one of our tasks was to research a potential career that we were interested in. And I looked up professional dancer in this big 3-ring binder of careers. And of course, it was like the lowest paying job of all the jobs in that the province had on record. And but I still really invested and researched it, and also simultaneously looked at what programs in higher education existed in Alberta. I wasn't ready at that time to travel too far from home. And so I remember driving with my mom up to Edmonton and getting a tour of Grant MacEwan College, it was called at the time, because they had a strong dance program. And then we also came into the University of Calgary and toured there, and I submitted applications to both places. But at that time, there was such a stark difference between each of the programs in Edmonton and Calgary. And I really felt that Edmonton had a clear focus of producing professional dance performing artists, whereas there was a lot more openness at the university. And I remember the description of this undergraduate degree being a liberal arts degree, and that absolutely I would have to take options in other subjects. And so I could take an English class and I could take a computer science class, and that at that time, I didn't know what I wanted to do with dance. I just knew it had to be a part of what I was going to do. And so it really was a better fit for what I was looking for. And then put the application in and went to the audition and was so nervous. That's how I ended up in the undergrad program in dance at U of C.
Amazing. And interesting, because one of my next questions was going to be, did you always know that you wanted to go into the more kind of like academic or research side of things? And maybe consciously you maybe didn't know that, but it does sound like that was a factor in decision making in terms of like picking between those programs that Calgary offered, a little bit more from a more robust kind of like academic standpoint.
Yeah, and I really had a positive experience through high school, and I worked hard, but academically was very strong. And I remember my math teacher in grade 12 really wanting me to go into mathematics and, those sorts of things. So I think that academic achievement really did, in a way, set me up for success. And at the same time, had a lot of support from my parents to pursue something that, was my passion and wasn't traditional in quotations and in a field that was really uncertain at the time. And so that definitely facilitated the decision making for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the time, I know the program wasn't like a combined, like now there is the option for that combined kinesiology and dance. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But at the time that didn't really exist, but it sounds like you were almost like forging that path yourself a little bit in terms of like combining things.
Erica, there has been so many serendipitous moments as I found myself in this career. And so this was the fall of 1996, which was the start of the undergraduate dance degree. You could major in drama, or you could have a degree in drama, but a dance minor. So you could study dance at the University of Calgary in the early 90s and late 80s. But at 1996 was the first time you could register as a dance major, a BA in dance. And I was a part of that first cohort. And then it happened again many years later as being part of the first cohort of the Masters of Science in Dance Science, that degree launched right when I was exploring the opportunities in grad studies. And it's been so fascinating to see this like thread of pioneering or being a part of the first time in this world of dance science and dance health research.
Yeah, because like you kind of alluded to, like it really wasn't a robust field back in the day. And even I did my undergrad at the University of, well, it was called the University of Western Ontario at the time. And I did it in kinesiology, but I substituted all my sport courses for dance courses. And that was like the kind of closest you could find to being a like combined degree program. And it really wasn't. Like it was very much just me being like, okay, like there's an option of taking these dance courses. And then when I was doing like independent research projects, I could kind of focus it around dance and stuff, but it didn't exist as like a field of dance kinesiology or dance science at all. Like it was me really being in the sport world and kinesiology and then being like, but I like dance, and kind of like finding a way to combine those. And so things have definitely evolved since then. But yeah, definitely that idea of being on like the cutting edge or the leading forefront of that. So can you just tell us a tiny bit about, like you just kind of alluded to there, like continuing on in your master's, and obviously you've gone on to do a PhD. So what was your sort of like academic path like out of your undergrad?
Yeah, I think out of undergrad, I worked as an independent artist, contemporary dance artist, in the province of Alberta, and was fortunate and successful at auditioning for back-to-back and kind of continuous projects with friends who were starting collectives and friends who had gotten grants to choreograph and produce a show. So I was very much employed as an independent dancer. That income-wise, that wasn't enough to live off of, and so I supplemented that with a job in retail, and that life was great for a couple of years. And that's sort of at the 3-year mark of living in Calgary or living in Edmonton and working on dance projects and also working retail. I was like, what? I don't want to work retail for the rest of my life to support this performing career that I'm enjoying. And so the wheels got turning, and I started having conversations with people who were doing a master's degree and who, my mentors at the university. And I remember meeting for coffee with some of my old professors and just sort of expressing that I didn't want to live the life that I was living right now, also wanting to stay in Alberta, also wanting dance to be a part of it. And what does that mean? So in a way, location really centered my initial decision making, because I wanted to live near the mountains, I wanted to be close to my family, and I wanted to dance to be in my career. And at that time, in our brainstorming with my friends and professors, there were 2 professional companies who employed dancers full-time, both in very specific genres that I was not fully trained in, jazz and ballet. And then there was the university. And so then I was like, well, what does it mean to work at a university and to be employed at a university? And grad school was the very clear answer to that. And so from there, the conversations around, okay, grad school, what does a master's in dance look like? And I researched the programs across Canada. I researched into the States, which was going to be international tuition for 3 years. And then I had a friend who was maybe 2 years older than I was, going through the undergrad program in London in the UK. And she was finishing up her master's in London. And we connected. And she said, Sarah, you might be interested in this program. It's brand new. They're launching it in 2003, which was timely when I was thinking about this. Mm-hmm. It's called Dance Science. Here's the website. Take a look. And I remember clicking on the link and reading the description and being like, oh my gosh, this is what I want to do.
This is it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And so from there, you have been pretty firmly rooted in the world of like dance science and academia since then. Do you want to just tell us a tiny bit about like what your research interest areas have been? And because I know they've changed and like ebbed and flowed a little bit over the years. So yeah, just kind of give us a brief idea, because I think it's really valuable for listeners to hear like how varied some of the options within dance science. Like we use that term a lot, but it's obviously such a huge term. So it would be super interesting to just hear some of what your research areas have been, because I know that they have shifted and changed a bit. And I think it gives people a really good idea of like how varied it can be within the field.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, using the term dance science now is really an umbrella term for integrating the science of what it means to dance, what it means to teach dance, what it means to be a dancer, all of these things. And so in those early days, I felt that I was honing in on what I wanted to do to explore dance science. And of course, that door just really opened up so wide to introduce me to dance physiology and dance psychology and dance biomechanics and the integration of somatics and applied movement principles. And I think in those early days, it really was about understanding how to enhance quality of movement, how to enhance our dance performance, and how to foster better dancing. And I use better in quotation marks, because how we just decide that is lots of ways.
Yeah.
And then coupled with that sort of performance enhancing, optimizing potential is injury and reducing injury and encouraging dancers to train in a way that's healthy and keeps them injury free. So that certainly was my initial focus in learning. And as the dance science department at Trinity Laban in the UK, where I trained in grad school, as they started to get some research grants and conduct their own studies in the department, we implemented screening, pre-season screening for all the dancers enrolled in their undergraduate degree who were seeking a performance career. And so being a part of that initial team as a graduate assistant was, I think, really valuable. And again, planting seeds for what I ended up doing in my PhD. It was around understanding what puts dancers at risk of injury and identifying perhaps deficits that are modifiable that we can act on ahead of time to facilitate training, developing. And I'm thinking about different fitness components, for example. And as the research in the dance science department evolved with screening these dancers, recognizing fitness was lacking in some areas, the decision makers integrated fitness as part into the curriculum. So they weren't just doing their technique. We also now had 4 groups of undergraduate dancers who were going to get a fitness class, and they needed people to teach that fitness class. And so that was my first introduction into teaching. And I was terrified. I was so averse to being a teacher through my undergrad and teen years. And I am in awe of my current undergrad students who are teaching at the same time as doing their degrees, because I remember how scary it was for me. And so with lots of mentorship and observing and shadowing, I got in there and I was like, oh, this isn't that bad. And so really grew to love and recognize the impact that doing some cross training in these dance institutions was having. And then from there, as I learned about, the knowledge of nutrition, foundations of physiology, and how our muscles work to produce movement and what they need, then I was able to start teaching at the undergraduate level myself after the master's program. And sort of like jumping ahead into the PhD world, it really was through staying connected to my undergraduate professors.
Yeah.
And their knowing I wanted to keep going. And, in those early years of like, ooh, university, what does it mean to work at a university? A master's degree was enough. And then, 10 years later, a PhD was required.
Yeah.
I kind of knew this academic inflation, they call it, was happening. And so opportunities to return to the University of Calgary presented. And I had a faculty member willing to take me on as a PhD student. And that was my open door. Dr. Reed Ferber in biomechanics agreed to take me on in his supervisory role. And then through that first year of coursework, my project as a PhD student began to evolve, and dancer screening was going to be a part of it. It's what I knew through and through, and it hadn't been applied to any dance populations in Calgary. And so that evolution led to changing supervisors so that I was coached by an epidemiologist, injury epidemiologist. And through her mentorship and my supervisory committee that formed later, I implemented preseason screening and did injury surveillance or injury tracking with 2 different youth populations in Calgary. And that sort of really lent itself to my training in injury epidemiology and focusing on how the different methods and definitions and things we need to be mindful of when we're talking about dance-related injuries and developing strategies to reduce them.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the listeners, just for like a bit of context, a lot of your work is where we get a lot of knowledge in terms of when we are talking about injuries. And people have heard me talk a lot about, like, if we're talking about time loss injuries versus physical complaint injuries and stuff like that, and a lot of the language around that, and even just being aware of like how specific we need to be when we're talking about injury epidemiology comes from your work originally, and like work that was happening around that time. So is definitely built a foundation of where we are headed in the world of dance science, because we still talk all the time about how we're probably 25-ish years like behind sports science. Maybe I'm being generous there, I don't know, but it is that those foundations that we need to be able to build upon. And now we're seeing sort of more and more and more research being able to be conducted faster and also just more specifically for dance populations because of that. So yeah, that work was incredibly valuable to the dance community.
I think another thing to note here is that in this, as more research happens and as we acquire more knowledge, and there's been this evolution of understanding that the studies that we conduct in ballet produce different results, but it's no longer acceptable to generalize. Okay, this work was done in a professional company in the UK, and therefore the generalizability or extrapolation of those findings is matched with any dance population or any dance genre or age or level of participation. And so it's really exciting to see the articulation of dance injuries in hip hop and dance injuries in contemporary and dance injuries in Southeast Asian dance. And a lot of that is because people are coming into these graduate degrees with that background, with that diverse background. And so a real shout out to those pioneers who are, the first in their cohort, who are the hip hop dancers, who are the Southeast Asian dancers, who are the Bharatanatyam dancers, because their influence really matters. Sometimes, and I'm sure you've talked about this, Erica, different dance styles require different things of us and our moving bodies. And the more we know about those differences really helps us articulate from a research perspective, which then can inform education, which then can inform clinical practice of those differences.
Absolutely. And it's kind of the same. And I think I've probably used the analogy before, like on the podcast, but it's like we talk about sports science, but it would be like talking about every sport the same, like a swimmer and a track and field athlete and a soccer player. And obviously, maybe physiologically, there are some similarities, but mostly there's a lot of differences, and dance is no different. Like, and we have, I think in the infancy of research, tended to try and just like be like, okay, we need something that is dance, which is different from sport. And now we have enough of a base of knowledge to know that, okay, now we can actually start to look exactly like you said at the specific genres or specific levels of training. And that's what we've seen in the sports science world just, a few generations ago or like years ago, because at the beginning it was similar where they were just like sports science and looking at exercise science or things like that in general. And now it's like every single sport is so specific and so detailed about every facet of it and how the body performs and stuff within those. And so dance is no different. We're just not quite as advanced. We're a little bit behind, but it is starting to, like you said, go in that direction. And we're starting to be able to look at more specific genres of dance and stuff, which is very exciting from a research perspective.
I was presenting at a sports science conference not too long ago, a couple of years ago, and there was a presentation I attended, and the researchers had articulated that they were from the rugby science group, that this idea of dance science being separate from sports science, and then the articulation of this is a rugby science group.
Yeah, now this is rugby science specifically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, this is so good. I can't wait for there to be a hip hop science and ballet science. And
yeah, absolutely. No, it is. And it does. It makes a huge difference because the demands on the body are definitely varied, which is interesting because like I work so much with just adolescent competitive dancers, and they're training in loads of different styles of dance often. So they might take tap and ballet and contemporary and jazz and hip hop and who knows, all of the different styles. And I often get asked the question if I'm doing workshops and stuff and we're talking about cross training and stuff. And sometimes, or often actually, very smartly, I will get asked by dancers, well, does the fact that I take all of these different styles count as cross training because like the muscle groups are different and stuff? And it's an interesting conversation to have because there are huge differences between, what you're using in hip hop versus what you're using in ballet. So maybe they do count as cross training a little bit versus a dancer who's only training intensely in ballet. So we do kind of look at that, but I'm getting off on a little bit of a tangent right now. So we're going to bring the conversation back. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about what your current research focus is? I know you also now supervise graduate students and stuff. And so you obviously have your finger in many, many, many different facets of research just based on what your graduate students are researching. But do you want to just give us a snippet of what kind of things are happening?
Yeah, there's some really great and exciting things happening right now. And I think I'll continue the thread of this dance injury thing, because that the year of my PhD data collection, was sort of counted as year one of this preseason and injury surveillance with the Alberta Ballet School. So we've got a really strong partnership with the Alberta Ballet School. And in June, maybe 3 weeks ago, we just finished year 10 of data collection. Amazing. And so we are going to pause at this year 10 mark, and that's inclusive of the pandemic and all of those interruptions and disruptions. But we really want to spend some time now doing some comprehensive analysis of the 10 years of data to tell a story of injury risk and pattern of injury. And we did that at the 5-year mark. One of my PhD students at the time, that was a lot of her assessments, and those studies have been published. Mm-hmm. So we know there's things like lumbopelvic control, there's things like dynamic balance, there's things like psychological coping skills that are a part of telling the story that are related to dance injuries at the pre-professional adolescent level. Mm-hmm. And so lots of recommendations for dance educators to be mindful of those skills, but that represent our psychological skills and our physical skills. And so we want to revisit that analysis inclusive of 10 years of information. The other piece, and you alluded to this in my bio, and this sort of transition, I guess, that I've had as a researcher into exploring dance as an activity, physical activity, to support the health and well-being of different diverse populations. And really that transition came because that's where the funding was. Mm-hmm. As a researcher, we are so dependent on taxpayer dollars and research institutes that have money for academics to apply for. And the success rate in the social sciences is far greater than it is in the clinical and health sciences. And knowing, unless the population you're working with is vast and hundreds of thousands of people are participating, and your research is really going to impact a lot of people, that's the population health sort of on the spectrum of science. The population health is at one end, and then the basic science working in the laboratory and maybe with animal models is on the other end of that spectrum. And so I was encouraged as an early faculty member to apply for funding in the social sciences, and I was successful. And so our first project was interviewing older adults who were dancing an hour a week in the basement of their local church, and to understand what that was like for them, and the benefits they felt or didn't feel. And we took a real strong lens around the social connections and social relationships within being active in a group. And that work has been so rewarding, both in supporting graduate students who led those interviews and the qualitative research methods, but also in being able to expand that into the dance programming here in Calgary that is designed for people living with Parkinson's, and the dance programming that is designed for people on their cancer journey, living with and beyond cancer. And we're now writing some grants that will focus on dance as contributing towards people in their menopause journey and what that means for them. And so that's been really, really rewarding, and only possible with some incredible colleagues who are experts both in qualitative methodology, in exercise and social relationships. So this has been such a team effort, and also timely, because the spaces where we are sharing our research are now accepting and open to this dance for health pillar of dance science. And so I do commend the International Association for Dance Medicine and Science for reimagining their vision and mission statement not too long ago to be inclusive of this work. Healthy Dancer Canada as well is really accepting of this work in their annual conferences. So that's where we're at right now.
Amazing. Very varied. And so obviously that sort of like opens our listeners' possibilities to like just having a little bit of a taste of like how many opportunities there are like within just dance science being a very big umbrella term. I often get questions from parents or like dancers, and especially dancers in their kind of like later high school years, who, similar to you, like are passionate about dance and they know that they want to stay involved in dance, but like maybe they don't actually aspire to a professional dance career. And so a lot of them ask me about physiotherapy or, you know, other things like that. But I often will bring up like other things like, or, you know, dance researchers and stuff. And sometimes they're just like mind blown. They're like, I didn't even know that was an option. Or, you know, if people are looking into programs, I'm often like kind of pointing them in the direction of, you might want to check out the University of Calgary because of this sort of joint program. So if you were talking to younger, so specifically, I would say like high school age dancers who maybe know that maybe professional dance isn't their thing and they are interested in more like academia and stuff, do you have suggestions about kind of paths to follow or how to get involved or what to look for if they're looking at specific programs and things like that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think for the high schooler, really just acknowledging that this blend and balance of both schoolwork and academics, doing well in the sciences and the maths and high school courses and in dance training really matter. And I'm saying that because of university requirements. And there's often minimum requirements in order to apply to universities, and kinesiology programs, psychology programs will all differ across institution, across the country. Calgary is the only institution that does have the combined degree. So in 5 years, you are getting a Bachelor of Kinesiology degree and a Bachelor of Arts in Dance. And often the dance programs in higher education require an audition. And so keeping up with your dance training at the same time as keeping up with your academics is your first and foremost priority, I would say. I would also encourage dancers to seek out opportunities to participate in research themselves. And that's often can be tricky, of course, in learning what's out there. But staying connected to dance organizations that maybe have a health focus or are conscious of health and are promoting dance research that's happening at urban centers. Research is not just in-person testing on a dancing body. There are a lot of surveys and there are a lot of interviews that you can volunteer to participate in, and those surveys can be conducted. There's work happening in Australia, then they're wanting to know different people's perspectives on a certain topic, and so they will send out a global public link to a survey that you can complete, and I think that experience of what it's like to participate in research can be really eye-opening.
For sure.
And then once you are into a degree and a topic that you're really focused on, seeking out opportunities to volunteer to support research projects. And researchers, academics are always looking for research assistants to help with their work, and grad students are looking for research assistants to help with their work. Sometimes those are paid positions if you've got a good grant, and sometimes they're volunteer, but that also really opens up your mind to what it means to be a researcher. And knowing the spectrum of projects and topics that we've kind of been touching on, there's also a spectrum of methods that we use to conduct research. And if you really like measuring and numbers and doing some statistics, then that's be a path to explore. And if you really like talking to people and hearing people's stories and pulling together themes of different stories, then that's also a very clear direction to pursue.
Yeah, amazing. And I love that you brought up the participating in research because I was also going to say, like, we have a decent number of clinicians who listen to this podcast, and sometimes we get questions about like clinician participation in research. And I know that the University of British Columbia, like through the physiotherapy department, they keep a database of clinicians who are interested or willing to participate in community-based research. So I suspect that many academic institutions do similar things. So if you are a clinician, depending on what field, whether it's like physio or chiro or whatever, there are probably databases you can enter or add your name to. And then when they are looking for community partners to, take clinical measurements of calf length or strength or whatever it is, I've participated in some Achilles ones and things like that. And so there's like opportunities and like those aren't necessarily dance specific, but just from a research perspective in general, there are for clinicians as well opportunities to be involved and to kind of like put your name forward as somebody who is willing to partner with some of the research institutions. So that's like such a great point for dancers themselves too. And I often share like studies when they're looking for participants just on my social media because I'm like, well, I don't meet the criteria for this, but somebody will. And so I know there's one going around right now that's like a pelvic health one for dancers. And so there's constantly studies that are looking for participants. So it's a great way for people to just get a sense of what it's like to be involved in that.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. All right. Well, I am aware of the time and I don't want to keep you for too much longer, but we are going to wrap up with 5 kind of rapid fire questions. But before that, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you feel like you want to share with the listeners or parts of your journey that you feel like were kind of important and we've missed out? I know this was a very abbreviated version of things.
Yeah, I think I'm just so encouraged by this conversation and by the opportunity and curiosity to talk about my career specifically. There's a whole group and community of us, dance research academics, and to just help spread awareness and knowledge that these careers exist is really meaningful. So I'm grateful for everyone's curiosity.
Yeah, amazing. All right. So these questions, I call them rapid fire. They're not really rapid fire, but I don't feel like you have to answer in one word. But if you are game for these, the first question that I ask all of our guests is, what is your favorite genre or style of dance?
Well, I trained in contemporary dance at the university, so that's my favorite and most comfortable to be in as a dancer. But when it comes to watching, I love all styles, especially those that showcase the athleticism and the diversity of the dancers.
Amazing. Second question, would you rather be on stage or in the studio?
Well, it's been about 6 years since I've been on stage performing in front of an audience, and I'm okay with that now with where I'm at in my life. And so my preference is the studio.
Fair. All right. If you could dance with or share the stage with any dancer, past or present, who would it be and why?
When I was studying in London in the UK, I was introduced to Hofa Schechter. And really became captivated with his work and his style. So it would be pretty amazing to work alongside him and his company dancers because there was a physicality, but a subtleness and diversity that he was able to portray on stage with his dancers. And it really was phenomenal.
Cool. What is one thing you would go back and tell your younger self as a dancer?
I would tell 17-year-old Sarah to never stop believing in herself. I feel very privileged that I've been able to live out this dream of having a career with dance in it from a young age, and through lots of interesting and unexpected and serendipitous journeys have found myself here. And so I would just tell her to never stop believing in herself.
I love that. All right. Finally, what's one thing that you would go back? Oh, sorry. That's the same question. Okay. Last one. If there was one thing that you could change about the dance world, what would it be?
That's a heavy question.
I know. It's such a heavy question.
Well, maybe I'll wear my Healthy Dancer Canada hat for this one. For I would love for all of us to really truly celebrate the many ways of being and knowing and learning and dancing, and for ongoing holistic health and well-being of people who dance, and really for these healthy practices that you advocate for and our organizations advocate for to be commonplace.
Amazing. I love that. I also hope for that and wish for that. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your story and your journey. And hopefully that has sparked some interest in some people to look more into the world of research and academia and stuff like that. If listeners wanted to learn more about the program at the University of Calgary or reach out to you, is there a contact information or a way that is best for them to reach you?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the degree program, the University of Calgary has, if you Google University of Calgary Dance Kinesiology, you'll find all the appropriate descriptions of the program. Perfect. Me personally, I will share my email address. It's kennys@ucalgary.ca, so KENNYS@ucalgary.ca.
Perfect. And I will put both of those in the show notes as well. So for anyone listening, I will put the link to the University of Calgary program, and I will also put your email address. So once again, thank you so much for being a guest today. And thank you everyone for tuning in and listening. I really appreciate your support, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.